It's really unfortunate, friends, when grown men assert their ambitions at the expense of children. This is unacceptable, but unfortunately, it's the most vulnerable part of the population that suffers because of this. When grown men assert themselves, they're asserting their own insecurities, their feelings of inferiority, or something else entirely. A moral breakdown that happened at some point in childhood? This is a common phenomenon. A Russian court has sentenced a 20-year-old resident of the Zaporizhia region to 18 years in a penal colony. The Southern District Military Court in Rostov-on-Don found Daria Kulik, a resident of the Zaporizhia region, guilty in a case of state treason and of preparing a terrorist attack in the FSB administration building in Melitopol, Interfax reports, citing the court's press service. Melitopol is located in the part of the Zaporizhia region occupied by Russia. Mediazona clarifies that Kulik is 20 years old. One of her cellmates described her to the publication as follows. A wonderful person, an athlete, a karate champion. She loves to draw, creative and active. And now, as many of these creative and active people as possible will be destroyed. The country doesn't need them. The country is preparing for slavery. Investigators claim that the girl not only photographed the building where FSB employees were located, but also bought items and substances in Melitopol stores to prepare an incendiary mixture, after which she hid them in a cache. In September 2023, she was detained. She did not attack the FSB office building, according to the report. And what are the security forces accusing her of? According to the security forces, Daria Kulik, on the instructions of a stranger in a messenger app, took photos and videos. The FSB building, as well as bought components for a Molotov cocktail. So the girl was detained when she came to the cache to hide these items there. There was nothing. She had only come to hide these items. Or maybe, does someone need this? Or maybe for someone like back in Chechnya, remember they captured a Chechen girl? She was 12 years old and they raped her? Maybe it's the same thing here. A beautiful 20-year-old athlete. Someone liked her. And then they can pin anything they want on her. I don't really believe in these kinds of assignments over the internet. Someone gave it to her. She's not a stupid girl if she's into sports. She's not a stupid girl, she should understand. She wouldn't just follow some stranger's instructions, make Molotov cocktails, and carry them somewhere. She was found right away in a hideout somewhere. A stranger, who is that? An FSB officer? The one who gave her this assignment. Maybe she tried to brush him off? Like she said, yeah, get lost. But no, you see, they took it into account right away. So, if you're a beautiful, smart girl, and some soldier is after you just to abuse you because he feels like he owns the place. Oh, friends, this is the scariest thing when such violence against the population begins. Remember the young guard, for example. After all, what we've been told, what we know about the young guard, it's all a bluff, it's all untrue, it's made up. But in reality, the situation was much more mundane. But they turned it into a legend and made heroes out of it for us. It's the same here. The meeting between Putin and Trump and Russia's missile race. At the moment, a future meeting between the two presidents is known about. Now they're going to describe the Putin-Trump meeting in every possible way. They'll say it's all wonderful, that it's all grandiose, but in reality it's not. Something was prepared, and the meeting actually took place in Alaska because after that, the world will be turned upside down. After that, the whole world will move in a completely different direction. I'm not going to talk or make predictions right now because that's not part of today's video. I'll wait until others have spoken, and then I'll make my own forecast. It will happen anyway, despite all those who are talking today. My forecast is always contrary and never goes along with everyone else, with anyone. If you've noticed, of course. But if you haven't noticed, that's fine too, friends. They're writing about some kind of failed negotiations, about the first results of the summit in Anchorage. They're telling us how Zelensky is feeling. But really, why should we care how Zelensky is feeling? He sold out all of Ukraine. He sold out every Ukrainian. Zelensky. Then why should Ukraine care about Zelensky today? No reason at all. I wouldn't even pay attention to it. There are statements from the Prime Minister of Hungary, Viktor Orban, but he's pro-Russian. And you know, it's this slave mentality. He's still under someone's heel. He's under Russia's heel, so how could he say anything different? For years, we've watched as the two largest powers, nuclear powers, destroyed the framework of their cooperation and sent signals to each other. Signals. Now that's over. Today the world is safer than it was yesterday. That's what he wrote on social media. What else did European leaders say, friends? That's not very interesting either. But look, the meeting between Putin and Trump, the world has become safer, really? After all, there were just tests by American destroyers in the Pacific where they used seismic weapons. After that, tsunamis occurred all over the world. Is that what you call safer? Is this a safe world that uses tsunamis? So much for a safe world that uses seismic weapons. All over the world, there's heat. Somewhere it's cold, somewhere it's raining, somewhere it's snowing. Yes, I wouldn't be surprised if in Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, instead of desert, there will be a vast sea. That is, they will pump water from the Pacific Ocean and transfer it into the desert. In the desert, where there is sand, there will be seas. Why is this dangerous? Because there are cities beneath the sands. And look, there are cities beneath the sands. So what then? Then these cities will be flooded from above by the seas as well. In general, we don't know how our world is structured, but we would really like to know. We study God knows what. We study subjects that don't exist. We study physics that doesn't exist. We study chemistry too that doesn't exist. So what are we studying? We waste 10 precious years, the time when we should be absorbing knowledge, when we should be filling up like balloons with the air of knowledge. We are supposed to be filling up. But who gives us this knowledge? No one gives it to us. We are given dogmas. Well, I don't know what else to say. European liberals, Americans, and the media are calling the meeting between the two leaders a victory for Vladimir Putin. What kind of victory is that? The meeting took place at the Elmendorf-Richardson military base in Anchorage and turned Putin from a Western outcast. With just one meeting, from an outcast, he became an honored guest on American soil. Voila, that's it. See? They held a single meeting on American soil, but not in the United States proper, out there, in the backwoods where I was born, Chukotka. That's my homeland, which has been wiped off the face of the earth. Completely erased, all the houses are gone. So in Alaska, we know very little about Alaska. I have some amazing stories where I try to show the truth, but even that truth is of no interest to anyone. There are many different conversations about Alaska. It was never actually sold by anyone, and in fact Alaska never belonged to Russia. It was an independent land belonging to no one, not American, not Russian. And in the 1950s, after the war, after World War II, Russians and Americans rushed to bomb Alaska together. Russia and Nazi Germany jointly invaded Poland. Russia and the United States jointly bombed Alaska. All the legends that Alaska belonged to Russia are unfounded. No, Alaska is an independent land. Everyone who disagreed with the takeover of the world by other alien beings went there. They went there. And these alien beings, during a long, drawn-out war that lasted for a full century, decided to do it secretly. Without telling anyone anything, they bombed Alaska in order to destroy the entire population that lived there. It was cruel, but it happened. That is, the entire population was blown up. The layers of earth that were closer to the water all collapsed into the ocean, into the seas. As analysts write, Putin got what he wanted from this meeting. On the air of the TV channel Russia 1, they insisted that the president's negotiations should not be considered unproductive, since signing documents at the summit was not planned from the start. In other words, the summit was for something else, not for signing documents. So what was the purpose of holding such a summit? Why did they gather? In Alaska. After the summit, they were not invited to Alaska, especially no one. But after the summit, European leaders were invited to Washington. On Monday, together with Zelensky, no, there were also European leaders there, but here it's a completely different matter. Here it's a more open, more ordinary meeting, in other words, just as usual. Because there were no conditions in Alaska, and some bloggers are talking about this. It started with a journalist. A Kremlin pool journalist was telling where they were accommodated. They were accommodated in a COVID center? That is, in a COVID center, supposedly a stadium, and during COVID, a center was set up at the stadium, and COVID patients were there. Well, that's how it supposedly was, friends. Such terrible, I must say, Spartan conditions were given to the Kremlin pool journalists, to Russian journalists. It's awful. It was a huge hall divided by fabric curtains, and in each section there were two beds, meaning wooden beds. And on these wooden beds, I don't know if there were any other mattresses on them, I don't know, journalists were supposed to sleep. It's not like, well, it's a rather strange attitude. There are hotels, as they say in Anchorage, there are more than 100 hotels, and they weren't fully booked. But it was specifically Russian journalists whom Anchorage refused. There are a lot of Ukrainians there, but most of all, there are Russians. All my classmates went to Anchorage. My classmates, my schoolmates, those I went to school with. I was the secretary of the Komsomol organization at my school. That's why many graduates of our school, Shakhterskaya School number 2 in the Anadyr district, remember me. They all left for Anchorage because, well, it's kind of nearby. Where else would you go? In Anchorage, everyone speaks Russian. Anchorage is basically the same as Russia, but the relationships between people are different. I have to say, these relationships, they're important. They're simple, but they're honest. In my village, no one ever stole, and we never locked the door with a bolt. Then people started coming from the mainland, from the big land, as we say in Chukotka, and they started stealing things. I invited them over to my place. A neighbor from the house next door. She came over for tea in the afternoon. She stole a figurine that glows in the dark. There were these ballerinas that glow in the dark. She stole that figurine. Well, we didn't have that many things in our apartment. Everyone lived quite modestly. And when she stole it, everyone noticed right away. Of course, my mom scolded me. But who would have thought the neighbor would steal? A few days later, I went to the neighbor's place. I realized that she was the one who stole it. A few days later, I went to the neighbor's, and there was my figurine standing there. I said that it was my figurine. She said, no, it's mine. I took the figurine and brought it back home. I said, if it's yours, let your mom come over, say so, and take it from me. And for now, this is my figurine, the one you stole from me yesterday. I was actually quite strict and decisive with people. That's probably why I was the secretary of the Komsomol organization. By the way, that girl, she was a teenager. They soon left our settlement. They were like tumbleweeds. They travel around looking for a better place to settle. My parents settled here in the 1940s. I think it was in 1947. They settled here in this village, and accordingly, I was also born here in this same village. I grew up and studied in Chukotka, in the village of Shakhtersky, which was later ordered to be wiped off the map by a federal program, a federal decree, in 2005. They demolished it, so that people wouldn't live there because they remembered too much. It's not necessary for people to remember too much. It's not necessary for people to tell someone else about it later. And then they started building a military airfield in that village, up on the hill where my father used to work, and where I learned to fly a plane with 2 pylons to fly fighter jets. I wanted it so much. Maybe it's still an echo of the time when, remember, Stalin's children flew, Khrushchev's children flew, they were taught to fly. And this, I guess, is also still an echo of wartime. That's why I wanted to be a pilot too. And besides, most of the people living around us were pilots, because there was an airfield, supposedly a civilian one, but in reality, it was a secret military airfield. It was disguised as a civilian airfield. And by the way, remember, there was an incident when some pilot was flying while there was a parade. Khrushchev was presiding. It was either May 1st or 2nd, and he was flying toward Moscow, and they shot him down. He wasn't shot down. He was never shot down. And that pilot landed here in Chukotka. He wasn't shot down. He turned around and flew back. See, that's the kind of history we have which we don't even know about. But we are witnesses to this history. I'm a witness to what happened at our airfield. My dad worked at the airfield back then, at that very same one. That's why I know what happened there. And people from our village also know that the reconnaissance plane that was flying over Sverdlovsk was supposedly shot down. In reality, it turned around. Its mission was not to fly to Moscow. It turned around and flew back. Its altitude, the flight distance was 10,000 kilometers. At that time, our planes, Russian planes, couldn't fly that far, couldn't reach an altitude of 10,000 kilometers. That's why all the fighter jets they sent after it, let's say, to intimidate it from the Russian side, couldn't reach that altitude. There was no way they could shoot it down. All of that was just stories for the Russian people. Can you imagine how the entire Soviet Union was deceived? Well, just like with Gagarin's flight and everything else. We're dealing with a global deception at the level of our presidents, at the level of general secretaries, at the level of, let's say, Communist Party propaganda. That's why that plane returned back to Anchorage. That's where it had taken off from. And how did they land it here, on our little hill airfield? It's just that when it started descending into Anchorage is near our Chukotka, friends. Well, nowadays it's said to be hundreds of kilometers away, but back then the strait was only 4 to 20 kilometers wide. Now it's big, but back then it was small, because after that they kept bombing it. And when it started to descend, that's when our fighter jets took off from our Gorka airfield. Those were the same fighter jets I used to sit in and learn to be a pilot, to fly. Fighter jets with 2 underwing mounts. That's when it happened. Our fighter jets took off, 2 of them, and forced it to land, although they say there were actually 4 fighter jets. But at this point, it doesn't really matter whether it was 4 or 2 fighter jets. But they made him land. He landed himself at our airfield. He didn't want to be shot down by a missile. At that moment, those 2 underwing mounts on the fighter jet could have been used. That's why he didn't want to be shot down and landed at our airfield, at our Gorka. That's how it was. But that's just what we, the witnesses, know. But does the state even need such witnesses, tell me? That's why our whole settlement was scattered. People were sent to different places. Some were given apartments on the mainland, some elsewhere. Some died suddenly, others too. Some got cancer and also died. Some were run over. In short, all of this was swept under the rug. No one knows about it anymore. And people still think that, yes, over Sverdlovsk, our guys shot down an American plane. It's easy to boast about your achievements, your technical capabilities. But at that time, no one gave Russia any technical capabilities. Russia was a gulag country. It had to follow orders exactly like a slave, do as commanded, and that's it. They ordered it to bomb Alaska, so it bombed. But when the United States was bombing Alaska, they accidentally, unintentionally dropped bombs on our tundra in Chukotka. See how it is? Did you know that? They bombed Welkal. The year was 1950. As you can see, the war had long been over, 1950. And until 1958, they kept bombing Alaska. Chukotka got hit too. We have a lot of round lakes and a lot of strange structures in the tundra. Just in the middle of the tundra, a huge number of strange structures. We don't know what they are. We honestly have no idea what they are. There's an object that the Chukchi and the local people call grandmother's eyes. There are 2 huge vats standing there. Inside them is the purest water. The vats are made of some kind of abnormal metal. No one knows what it is, but they're still standing there to this day. It's pretty hard to get there, only by helicopter, because there are no roads at all. All the roads have been removed. The roads, they're just gone. The tundra, yes, it was bombed. Basically, I grew up in a military zone, my friends. A military zone, military secrets, the military. They probably affect all the children who grow up there in a different way. And me too. Some secrets aren't really secrets to me. They seem completely simple. Later, when I was in Switzerland, I was invited onto some fancy helicopter, a black one, a black Puma helicopter. A general invited me to fly with him to some military units. Swiss ones, so I went. They were surprised why I wasn't afraid, why it didn't interest or amaze me at all, by what I saw high up in the Swiss mountains. Yes, when you get used to it, you treat it like it's nothing special, like that's just how things are. When your brain has been receiving this information since childhood and doesn't single it out as anything special. And this very lack of specialness actually gives you big advantages in life later on, when you're not afraid of anything, not startled, when it's just an ordinary thing for you. And nothing can scare you, especially those explosions. That happened in Chukotka. And when it went off, when it really went off with that boom, the whole air would shake, and the whole ground would tremble. I asked my parents, "What is that?" And people would say it was military planes breaking the sound barrier. And so when they break that barrier, naturally there's a loud bang. But that wasn't the case. I understand that well now too. But we had to believe, we didn't ask unnecessary questions. What was our life like? We got used to it. But how do you explain this to people now? Many children today grow up not understanding this because they didn't grow up in a military environment. I grew up surrounded by the military. There were secret military units all around, just secret military units everywhere. I was taught to always be alert to everything around me for security reasons, even back then. Yes, we were trained that way. There was an incident once when in the neighboring settlement of Ugolnaya Kopia, a man was walking around taking photographs. And he was photographing that very mountain, Gudim, which was located between the mountains, in a gorge. There was a mountain, Gudim, the secret mountain. And he was walking along, taking pictures. The children on their way home from school saw this man with a camera. And the camera was a rare thing for us in Chukotka. So naturally they ran and told their parents. The parents called the military unit. They came out and arrested him. He turned out to be a spy, and this is what they told us. We children perceived this. And they took it quite seriously. In class we were told that we need to watch out. Keep an eye on the stranger who is walking around. After all, when you know everyone in your village, here is a small village in the middle of the white, snowy desert. And you, of course, understand here he is a stranger who has come. And you know all the rest. It's clear? You can't hide there. Everyone can be seen. And our checkpoint zone was a double cordon. That's because it was Chukotka. But now Alaska, when presidents meet, they're the same friends. Anchorage, Chukotka, Alaska. For us friends, from Chukotka to Alaska, it's only 4 kilometers by rowboat to the nearest little island. And the nearest little island is already American. So swimming across those 4 kilometers is totally doable. The next islands are 10 kilometers away. They bombed them. They bombed them in the 1950s and made the Bering Strait, which we're told is thousands of years old. And that some guy named Bering discovered it. No, Bering didn't discover it. It was bombed in the 1950s. They bombed it in order to create the strait. At that time, they placed a lot of explosives, a lot of atomic bombs, right between the layers, between the plates. And the explosions were so powerful that they caused a tsunami so strong that nothing like it has happened since. The wave was 556 meters high. So far, the seismic weapon that was used at the end of July 2025 hasn't produced such a result, as was shown in 1959. We were warned that the very tsunami wave was coming, and the local population was sent up the hill to that very military airfield. We walked there on foot, a kilometer from home to the top of the hill. But I think the tsunami would have swept away everything anyway. If the tsunami had swallowed our homes, how would we have lived? Where would we have stayed? Can you imagine that? That's why I know what it's like. I feel sorry when people lose their homes. I said that there would be a tsunami in Kamchatka a year and a half ago. I mentioned in my forecast that there would definitely be a tsunami and that it would be artificially triggered. There will be events that many will not survive. A new wave is approaching, like a tsunami wave, but for human society. A new moral, psychological, and physical tsunami wave is coming. Of course, somewhere it will happen in its real form. That is, in some places it will be an actual tsunami wave. For example, in Kamchatka. I expect tsunami waves in Kamchatka artificially triggered. Listen closely. I come from a family of prophets, so I can say this. With certainty, I say what I see in the ether. I am Tanya Karatsuba Said Burhan. August 16th, 2025.